Hello again, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. Again, I must say that I am such a big fan of today's guest. Most publications also recognize him as one of the top subject matter experts in marketing and one of the top influencers today. Jay Baer is the author of 6 best-selling business books, the founder of 5 multi-million-dollar companies, a frequent emcee in keynote, and one of fewer than 200 living members of the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame. And he's a subject matter expert at word-of-mouth marketing. And on this episode, we'll discuss the relevancy of marketing and earning customers' attention, word-of-mouth marketing and compelling conversations, focus on your core product and service, the differentiator between llamas and alpacas, unicorn cornbread, and even how to turn a domain name into 50 cases of beer. So let's tune in to the amazing Jay Baer with a unicorn shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. So, Jay, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would tell us a little bit, briefly, for the 3 people in the world who don't know who you are, give us a quick overview of you and your background.
I would love to do it. Kind of delighted to be here with all the sharks. I am a long-time sort of digital marketing consultant. I started in online marketing in 1993.
Yeah.
True story. My partner and I, in my first company, sold the domain name Budweiser.com to Anheuser-Busch for 50 cases of beer. That's how long I've been doing this. That's totally true, by the way.
Yeah.
And since then, I've had a series of digital marketing strategy agencies. My current firm is called Convince and Convert. It's about 10 and a half years old. We work with many of the world's most interesting and largest brands on social strategy, content strategy, digital strategy, word-of-mouth strategy, customer experience strategy. I write books and I give speeches, and I have 2 podcasts, one called Social Pros, which is about kind of big brand social media marketing, and a brand new show just launched yesterday, actually, called the Talk Triggers Show, which is all about amazing word-of-mouth case studies.
So when you sold Budweiser, did you not think you were getting an amazing deal at the time?
We did, because I was 23
exactly.
at that point, and I was like, dude, 50 cases of beer is a lot.
Gold.
And so and here's the thing, like, for real, domain names were free then.
Yeah.
Free, because why would you want a domain name?
Right.
Like, what would you do with a website? Like, nobody had a website. So to turn a free registration into 50 cases of beer, we're like, dude, score.
Exactly.
Now, much later, of course, there became a market for this, and my buddy who ran the business with me, he registered one without me because I was on vacation or something. And it was beer.com. And he sold that years later to Molson Brewing for $5.1 million.
Oh, nice.
But I drank some beer.
Yeah. Well, fortunately,
Budweiser long necks, Bud Heavy long necks. That's what it was. Our whole office, we had a one door with a lock on it, and we had to put all the beer in there because we didn't want the beer to walk out the back door. Yep. Those were the days. It was 1993, so that was a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, Jay, you met the minimum threshold for being on this show with being a New York Times best-selling author of 6 books and the founder of 5 multi-million-dollar companies. I mean, normally I hold the line at 7 books and 6 companies, but I made an exception. Yeah.
Standards.
Yeah. Well, I know this is probably the pinnacle of your speaking success, but you're considered one of the very top people influencing marketing today. What kind of pressure comes with being that sort of top 10 influencer? I mean, you're still a working marketer. You're the head of a consulting, of an agency. I mean, how do you keep up in marketing knowledge, so to speak, in order to stay really at the top of your game? I know you're probably not worried about how many Twitter followers or Instagram followers you have, but really to be held at that level of respect, you got to stay on point all the time.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. It's really thoughtful. It is hard, and there is pressure there now because look, when I just started out doing this kind of thing probably 11 years ago, creating content, no one gave it, no one cared, right?
Yeah,
and so
sure.
My first blog reader was my mom, like everybody's, right? And now it's hundreds of thousands of people every month, and there is some responsibility there. So I think you want to make sure that you're coming at it from the right way. And I always feel like, I wrote a book about this called Utility.
Mm-hmm.
Like I always feel like if you're coming at it from the perspective of I want to educate people. If I can educate people and make them successful, I'll be successful eventually. And I think if you keep that as your kind of North Star, that really helps. And the second piece is I just want to make sure that the things that I say and the things that I recommend are true. Like
Exactly.
they may not always be true because it's the nature of marketing now, but at least true at the time that I talked about them. And then the third piece is sort of in terms of keeping on top of it. The good news is that when I just started out, it was just literally me. It was like literally me in my bedroom. And now we have a whole company and lots of very smart people who are way smarter than me, who all have their own sort of, parts of expertise, right? So we've got people on the team who are really experts at social. We've got other experts who are really into like stories and real-time social, other people who are more on the content side, others that are more on the customer service side. So it helps having like a bigger base of people in the organization so that all of the thinking doesn't have to come out of my head.
One of the conversations I had with Neil Patel way back when was, something he's had a problem with. It's a concern. Did you ever think about naming it Jay Baer Digital?
Of
Because
course.
that comes with a lot of responsibility.
And I didn't on purpose.
Yeah.
I did it because I had started a company before and sold it. And in fact, I didn't even have a Jay Baer website for a long time.
Right.
Because a couple things.
Well, you couldn't afford the beer to buy it.
Well, yeah, that's it. One, if your name's on the door, it becomes harder to sell.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sell Convince and Convert. That's not why I built this one, but I did sell my last one. And two, if your name's on the door and then you're not working intimately on every client project, it's like, well, wait a second. I thought we were going to work with you because it's your company, your name's on the door. Convince and Convert is led by me, but it's by no means just me. We've got lots of people who are really great, and I still approve everything before it goes out the door. But I'm not making every PowerPoint deck,
right?
Nor could I, nor do I want to.
Yeah.
So, that's why we've got the Convince to Convert site, which is the company site, which has our blog and our podcast and all that. And there's a Jay Baer site, which is more about me and speaking and that kind of stuff.
For sure. Well, so I saw this in one of your videos, but kind of dive into marketing. Talk about all the noise that people see and how relevant marketing is important today. How do we compete against all the Kardashians? Your mom and her attention that requires. But I think that's really an important part of marketing today is how to stay interesting and relevant. There's a lot of noise for people like me who literally have ADD and OCD. It becomes very difficult to grab and keep my attention, but it's a challenge for all marketers and advertisers today.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're in an era where two things are true that didn't used to be true. One, there is a tremendous amount of competition for attention.
Yeah.
Everybody is creating content. Everybody's creating social. Everything is festooned with ads or messages or something else in a way that it just wasn't in years past. And then second, consumers now have the ability to filter out messages, right? You can skip commercials on your TiVo or your DVR, right? You can fast forward the ads on the podcast. There's just you can use an ad blocker. You can put emails in a promotions folder. So there's just a lot of consumer technology available that allows you to not interrupt them with messages. So both of those things being true sets up a situation that we find ourselves in now, which is that attention is the currency, and every marketer in any circumstance is like, how do we gain attention? How do we earn attention is the better way to describe it. And the reality is that attention comes from relevancy. Relevancy is the killer app. Like that's it. Because I know this to be true. Because if somebody says, and we hear this all the time, customers will say, well, I didn't listen to the podcast, or I didn't go to the webinar, or I didn't watch video. I just didn't have time. And that's bullshit.
Yeah.
That is not true. If somebody says they didn't have time, what they really mean but won't tell you is that what you have given them is not
Not of
relevant
value. Yeah.
enough.
Yep.
It's not relevant enough, because this is totally true, Kenneth. If you give somebody the content that they want
Mm-hmm.
in the format they prefer,
Mm-hmm.
and you give it to them at the right time, the time necessary to consume that content magically appears.
Right.
Magically
Right.
appears, right?
Yeah.
So, if somebody says, I don't have time to go to the doctor, if their arm is bleeding, it's crazy how fast that time is created.
Mm-hmm.
Content's the same way. So the only thing that matters is relevancy. Relevancy creates time, and relevancy creates attention. So one of the challenges that I think people have in marketing today is they think too big. If you want to be relevant, and you do, the best way to do that is to say, how can I be some subset of people's favorite version of this thing? So lots of friends of mine have started podcasts. I've had my show now for 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing this a really long time. Lots of friends have started podcasts or video series or blogs or a book or whatever. And I always tell them the same thing, which is, if you want this to be successful, it has to be somebody's favorite podcast in the world. It has to be somebody's favorite book ever. It has to be somebody's favorite blog on the internet. It has to be somebody's favorite Instagram account, period. And the only way you can be somebody's favorite
Mm-hmm.
is to be more specific and more relevant. And that's hard, because in marketing, we train ourselves to say, how can we be big and reach more people?
Right.
When really what we should be thinking is, how can we be more relevant to a smaller group of people?
Agreed. Agreed. Well, do you worry about, even with your own persona now,
Yes,
overextending? I mean, it's,
all the time.
yeah, with being a new podcast. So how
All
do
the
you
time.
sort of deal with that from your own public persona? Not take out
Yeah.
the marketing and brands point, but the Jay Baer brand itself.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing for us is that our clients are all big companies. That's
Right.
what we do on the consulting
Yeah,
side,
yeah.
right? We only work with big companies, and yet there's a lot of people who listen to my podcast or my new show as well, or read our blog, who aren't part of a big company. So they will never be a consulting client. And so the question becomes, does that create a weird sort of brand for Convince to Convert or for me? Um, and then we also think, okay, well, that's all right. If they're not going to be a consulting client, let's give them something else, right? So how can we monetize that attention some other way? Because ultimately it is a business, right? And so that's why we've got sponsors for a lot of our content, because then we're monetizing indirectly. You don't have to be a client
Mm-hmm.
for it to make sense for me to aggregate an audience, right? So we think of it as kind of sponsor revenue, course revenue. We're starting to do more and more courses. We're not super good at it yet, but we're starting to do more and more courses. So sort of like sponsor revenue, course revenue, consulting revenue, right? And so the bigger the company, the farther down that funnel you typically
Right.
fall. So, but it's a really good point that we're always thinking about that in the company for a couple of reasons. One, company size, but also topic, right? So I wrote a book about social media. I wrote 3 books about content marketing. I wrote a book about customer service, and now I've got a book about word of mouth. Now I can tie all those books together very easily, but most people who are have an audience in the marketing world are a thing. Like Pam, our friend Pam Moore, is a social media influencer. Robert Rose is a content marketing influencer.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people, there are some, but very few do it the way I do it, which is a bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sometimes challenging, but I would have it no other way, because I get really bored and I'm like, yeah, okay, I want to write a book and talk about and do strategy about what I'm interested in today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I purposely do that. Like I purposely change topics, and that can be a little tricky.
Yeah, I've had that same conversation with Ann Hanley, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I think that's interesting with guys like you, with ladies like her, if Seth Godin wrote a book about PPC today, we'd probably sit up and listen. We'd read
Yeah.
it and take it in, but No, I think to be a great marketer, you've really got to have a really strong understanding in all of them. So, to start, I want to go back to one of your earlier books that I enjoyed, Utility. I still love the introductory comment that said something like, for my brother Jeff, who was so useful, I used to pay him to fix my bike. And,
That's true.
I love
That's
that
very true.
especially. I mean, it was one of the first things I caught in the book. One of the
Thank you.
weirdest things that I'll ever bring up is that part. But I loved in the context of something that I fully believe in, and that says you have in the title, why smart marketing is about help and not hype. For marketers as well as like yourself, people like me, I think we're trying to help people, or we wouldn't do this podcast, for example.
Yeah, right. Right.
But are you comfortable that marketers as a whole are doing more of that today than before, which is
Totally.
basically helping
Yes.
people and help their customers?
Yeah, I'm not going to take credit for it, but for sure, I think the idea of utility, the premise that being helpful can assist you in aggregating an audience, is absolutely more prevalent than it was when I wrote the book many years ago. It's absolutely part of how marketers think. Not every marketer, but way more so than it used to be. Now, we still got a long way to go. There's still a lot of
Mhm.
like click here, buy now stuff, and there always will be. But yeah, I think we've come a long way in understanding that helpful content and sort of giving, and then worrying about how you get down the road has become, um, even the whole principle of kind of inbound and all of that all kind of fits together, right? It's all
Agreed.
we're a lot farther along than we used to be, which is I think good for everybody.
Well, you said in one of your speeches that how much you love speaking, that you wanted to be able to see somebody 6 months, I believe, later, get something from your speech and apply it. And if they didn't, that's when you'd sort of hang up your speaking shingles. But I think that book is a
Yeah,
perfect example. If anybody stopped, if they got the book in 2013, they should be using that today and 10 years from now, being able to help people. That's
thanks,
that's why I thought it was just such a relevant. So another
thanks.
one that I've really enjoyed, and I sent this when we first conversed, I think, was Hug Your Haters. And I have
Mm,
spent a ton of time in reputation management, and I've worked with a lot of brands, some that had some extremely intense problems, a lot of them, brought on by themselves. But
yeah,
leadership, always thinks that you can fix this with additional clever marketing, throw some tech, some dollars, whatever. I've always believed that to me, one of the most important parts of your marketing should rest upon great service, that product or service, that a customer buys. Otherwise, it's just as Sarah Palin, and this is probably the only time I'll quote Sarah Palin, but it's lipstick on a pig. What kind of advice do you give brands today on how to truly hug their haters, embrace those problems, and then fix the core of their service?
well, what's interesting about it is, you know, customer service is a spectator sport now, as
Yeah,
I talked about in the book.
yeah.
That a lot of our exchanges with customers take place now in social media, ratings and review sites, discussion boards and forums, places where other folks can see how that exchange plays out. Furthermore, how people make buying decisions has changed a lot because
Hmm.
of all the data that's available. If you go to Google and search, tire repair in Bloomington, Indiana, you're going to get a map. You're going to get a bunch of ratings and reviews, right?
Yep.
You're going to get
Yeah.
scores. You're going to get ratings. Like there's a bunch of stuff that Google's going to show you that is going to determine whether or not you ever even click to somebody's website, right? If you've got tire guy 1 who's a 4.4, tire guy 2 is a 4.3, and tire guy 3 who's a 3.7, the guy who's 3.7 is not even going to get a chance at the business. So one of the things we have to do with executives and leaders is make them understand that how people make buying decisions has changed fundamentally, and we rely on each other a lot more than we rely on whatever message the company has concocted. So that's the first thing, right? That to your point, reputation management is super important, way more than ever, and it's just going to get more important. Like that
Hmm.
cow is not going back in the barn.
Yeah.
Incredibly important. In fact, in some ways, I wish I would have written "Hug Your Haters" this year because it's even more
Yeah.
critical now.
Yeah.
There's finally, like that book. A lot of the books that I write, I end up looking back and say, "Man, I wrote that 2 years too early."
Yeah.
It happens a lot, but that's okay. The other thing is that we underinvest in customer service to a degree that is absolutely amazing to me. We spend so much money trying to acquire companies, and so little money trying to acquire customers, and so little money trying to keep customers. Like, it's insane. Average B2B company spends 2% of revenue on customer service.
Yeah.
2%. That's nuts. So then we have circumstances like you described, where companies like, hey, we need a better reputation, so let's spend a bunch of money on consultants and technology to improve our reputation. To which I would say, well, what if we don't do that and we spend that same money just making ourselves a better company?
Mm-hmm.
And then we fix the problem forever, right? I did a webinar. This was like 3 years ago. This is when Hug Your Haters was first coming out. I did a webinar for a chain of preschools, like high-end fancy preschools, doesn't matter which one. All of their franchise owners were on this webinar. And I went through the whole system, like, okay, why customer service is important, why it's a spectator sport, how to handle detractors, how to respond to reviews, the whole playbook, right? Like an hour. We get into the Q&A. First question, Kenneth. First question. Jay, how can we get fewer negative reviews? And I was like, Jesus, we just talked for an hour about this.
Right.
So I was a little bit angry, and I responded in a way that was probably inappropriate.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you could just run a better preschool. And they didn't appreciate that. They did not appreciate that very much. But I was at the end of my rope.
Well, I think how many conferences, I mean, where this core issue is important to all marketers, to all executives. And if you thought about, I mean, I just did some cursory work on the number of conferences out there. There are well over 300 conferences year over year in marketing.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. At least.
In customer service, there were, I mean, it was minuscule. It was like 2%. Yeah, it was 2% of that marketing, of that total spend. And it's sad because
that's why Hug Your Haters sold fewer copies than any other book I've written, because reading a book about customer service, most people are like, I don't want to read a book about customer service. That sounds like a bummer.
Yeah. Well, and where it really has appealed to me over time, and I've spoken about it before at conferences. I've heard other people, I've heard the CEO of Consumer Affairs speak about it at conferences, especially lead gen conferences, is now people are starting to see where it can affect their sales. And if you were to make a second edition, bring the book back by Encore, by popular demand, and add that second edition, it's really, adding in, here's where it affects that bottom line. And that's when it becomes the most popular one of your books, for all the executives. So
it's funny you talk about that. Like even stuff like Glassdoor, right?
Oh, unbelievably. Absolutely.
Has a real impact now on recruiting and retention of employees. We've done quite a bit of Glassdoor consulting with some of our clients in the last year or two. Because they're like, wow, we feel like this is actually making a difference in our ability to get employees. I'm like, yeah, it does make a difference.
Well, think of the difference, 10 years ago, it would have been, somebody in the New York Post wrote a bad review or any paper about a restaurant. Now you're worried about Bob and Susan, who just gave you a 1-star review on Yelp because the waiter was mean and the food was late and cold. And that's just as devastating today. Because if you're walking on the street. But so let's talk about some maybe llama drama. And one of my favorites now, the bestseller talk triggers that I see every airport I walk through, I see it front and center. But, what inspired you to write this one? What was happening with word of mouth that made you slightly divert from some of the other subject matters? I mean, again, you talked about some of the other types of books you've written. This was a slight diversion, at least in my mind. It's brilliant. I think it's some of your best work. But what sort of inspired you to write this one, what you saw in marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about switching topics when I write books, but I write them all. I write every book for the same reason.
Yeah.
And under the same circumstances, which is, it's great having a consulting firm because we're working with, with companies every day.
Mm-hmm.
And when I start to see a pattern of questions emerge, then I'm like, if these guys, who are some of the biggest companies in the world, don't know the answer, nobody knows the answer. So in this case, what was happening is people were saying to us, well, Jay and Jay's team, we feel like we've got a decent handle on the mechanics of marketing now, of social and content. We kind of know what buttons to push, but we're not really sure what we should be saying. And I was like, holy cow, these guys don't really know what their story is. And I'd been writing about talk triggers and word of mouth off and on for 9 years, but I'd never spun it into a book. And I'm like, okay, now the time is right, because I started to see the fatigue with digital, right? With programmatic, with social ads, with sort of social algorithms, and all the things that marketers are frustrated by today. Declining email performance. I'm like, look, you couldn't write a book about word of mouth for a number of years, because people are like, no, it's all about social media. And I'm like, nope, pendulum swinging back the other way. Now's the time to write about this, because look, word of mouth is the oldest form of marketing, and it is still the most effective form of marketing. Like, and that's not just me saying that as an author of a book about word of mouth. There are dozens of studies that demonstrate that word of mouth is the number one way that consumers make decisions about what to buy. Number one. But the part that's crazy, and the reason that Daniel Lemon and I wrote the book, is that despite the fact that word of mouth is so important, despite the fact that 50% of word of mouth is online and 50% is offline, nobody has a strategy for it. Nobody. Like, you've got a content strategy, a social strategy, PR strategy, HR strategy, crisis strategy, and a strategy for everything. Nobody has a word of mouth strategy. They just take it for granted. I'm like, how did we get to this point where it's the most important thing in marketing, yet nobody has an actual plan? It's crazy. So we said, all right, what we need to do is give people an actual system, a framework that they can actually follow to put a word of mouth strategy in place. And that's how we ended up with the book.
Well, sadly, if you thought about that strategy, the closest that most people come to is they figure out who those advocates are, and then build some sort of retargeting strategy around similar personas, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, there is some correlation between sort of advocates and influencer marketing and word of mouth. But our philosophy is that the best word of mouth strategy doesn't require people of a particular type or circumstance or following to tell your story. Your regular customers are enough if you do it well. You don't need to go find a celebrity or even a demi-celebrity. Just your regular customer will bring you new customers if you give them a story to tell.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know who I'm going to look to if I need to buy tires in Bloomington. So
that's right. I got a guy.
Look for the call. So, obviously I would encourage anyone and everyone to go buy this book, but at a high level, can you, just for the people that haven't read it yet, give some overarching sort of best practices that marketers can take for creating talk triggers and sort of starting to create that word of mouth environment?
Yeah, let me define a talk trigger first. A talk trigger is a strategic operational differentiator that compels conversations. So it's something that you do differently in your business that customers notice and talk about. So even though we say word of mouth marketing a lot, it's not really marketing. It's an operational decision that creates marketing advantages, but it's not marketing in the classic sense, right? It's not content, not usually. It's not a contest or a coupon or a promotion or a product. It's something that you do differently that customers notice and talk about. Now, the key part of this is to do something that customers don't expect, because the big mistake is that we have convinced ourselves in business that competency creates conversation. That if you just run a good company, people will talk about you, but that's not actually the way the world works.
Agreed.
Like, I don't know everybody who's part of your show, but I'm sure I know some folks in addition to you. I know this, though, for sure. Nobody ever says, hey, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I had.
Right.
Because that's a shitty story. Like, nobody, it's not a good story to tell, and it's not a good story to listen to. So it's a story that doesn't get told. So you have to give people something they don't expect. And when you do that over and over and over, consistently, that becomes your talk trigger. It catalyzes customer conversations, and it gets your customers telling your story every day, week, month, quarter, and year. That's how you go from word of mouth on accident to word of mouth on purpose, which really is the point of the book.
Well, I can't wait to tell you about this middle of the road 3-star review. We can talk about later on the after the show.
I did a whole piece for Yext a year or so ago on about the about why 3-star reviews are actually the most important reviews you can have as a business, because most people write reviews when they're super stoked or super pissed, right? Because it's Again, both of those circumstances are outside your expected pattern.
Mhm.
I'm way more happy than I thought I would be. I'm going to write a review. I'm way more disappointed than I thought I would be. I'm going to write a review, right? It catalyzes the conversation. And a review is just word of mouth written down. However, if somebody's going to write a 3-star review, in almost every case, and we've actually got data on this now, the 3-star review is actually usually long, nuanced, detailed, right, and information rich. It's somebody who has been very thoughtful about their experience with your business and took the time to say, on this hand, but also on the other hand, right, which is how you end up with the 3-star review. So if you're going to go mine data operationally in your company on things to like, oh, how could we get better? The 3-star review is a great place to start.
Well, there's the title for the second edition. Hug your apathetics.
Yeah, hug your 3-star reviews.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, you're a marketer that I have a great deal of respect for because you talk a lot about the core parts of a business and the service, not just the ads and brand babble that so many marketers talk about. When you start getting requests for advice from marketers, young and old, what's sort of the core pieces of advice, especially to executives, that you give them today in order to help improve their marketing efforts, improve their brand positioning, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, there's a few things. One, especially in the throes of this Talk Triggers book and the work that we're doing on the consulting side in word of mouth now. I quote Robert Stevens a lot. Robert's the founder of Geek Squad. I wrote about him in Utility as well. But Robert once said something that's not 100% true, but it's true enough. And he said that advertising is a tax paid by the unremarkable. And I think there's a lot to pull out of that, right? Like, advertising and marketing shouldn't be celebrated necessarily, right? Because you do it only because you have to, right? The best companies in the world don't have to, right? Their customers are their sales and marketing team, right? The customer experience is the ad, right? So that's what we try and communicate to executives now. Like, look, CX is the nucleus of everything now, right? Like, it doesn't matter how good your content is. It doesn't matter how good your social is. It doesn't matter how good anything is if your customer experience isn't on point. So customer experience is the center of all of it. So we talk about that a lot. And then the other thing is that we continue to help companies and other folks think about this idea of stopping random acts of content, right? We've all kind of gotten into this mindset, how the world has changed, where it's like, oh, we got to do content, we got to keep making some content. If we're not making enough content, like we work with a lot of big companies where the content team is actually evaluated based on how many pieces of content they create.
Good Lord. Yeah.
Right? They're literally bonused on volume. And I'm like, whoa, we gotta change this. It can't be about volume. It has to be about relevancy and performance. Right. And so we really try to make people think about shows, that every piece of content you create should be part of a larger series, right? It's a podcast show. It's a webinar show. It's a blog show. It's an Instagram stories show, right? That this just like sort of firing off random, one-off whatever doesn't work, and it's not gonna work. And so we've done a lot of consulting in the last 18 months with organizations, trying to kind of get them to rethink about editorial calendar and content strategy.
So what are your thoughts on what's next? I mean, what worries you out there in the marketing world? I know you're on pretty much everybody's what's next prediction list. You and a few others want to know what Jay Baer sees for 20X and beyond. So
I'm excited and also nervous about voice.
Yeah.
Because today, if you use your phone or your laptop and you do a search for whatever, Google will show you 10 results on that first page. Mm-hmm. If you ask Alexa or Google or Siri, they're going to give you one result.
Mm-hmm.
And that changes everything. If you're not first, you're nothing.
You're last.
Now, if you're seventh, on in your Google results, like, okay, I'll get traffic off of that. But now there is no second. There is only first, and that makes me wonder. It makes me wonder about, how do people find blogs? How do people find podcasts? How do people find videos? Certainly video, and this is not any big piece of new information, but how do you, and we're doing this at Convince and Convert, and we help companies do it as well, how do you pursue a video first strategy where everything you do starts with video and then becomes audio or text as opposed to the other way around?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really important piece of what's going on right now. And then obviously personalization and relevancy through data, right? And using AI and big data and machine learning in a way that makes the customer experience better. I see a lot of people now using data in ways that makes the customer experience equal or worse, because big data, it's not about big data, it's about big understanding, right? Data by itself has no value, none. It's only what can you use that data for that actually becomes interesting. So that's something that I'm paying a lot of attention to as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about voice, but it really does show that if your brand is not the number one leader in people's mindset, if they don't know, if you don't specifically know what you're looking for, like if I'm ordering from, Bob's, tire and truck shop in Bloomington, and I know and that's the name of it, boom, that's easy. If I'm looking for tire repair, it's really going to change the way people find things, as much as they, won't necessarily change the way they search for them, but they've got to know whether or not they're asking for pizza or Pizza Hut. And it's really going to change things. So, if you had to think about your own career, from being an entrepreneur to being a best-selling author multiple times to being a speaker a gazillion times, and, everything else in between in your marketing career, which part of your career do you think has helped shape the most influence in your own success? And I'll tell you why I asked that. I know you love being a speaker, but I know you love being a speaker for the right reasons, and that is to help people. Mm-hmm. That's often a little bit of a dichotomy from a lot of people who just simply love to see themselves up on stage, and they don't hear from their customers.
Yeah, my friend Rory says it best, that a speech is nothing but an advertisement for what's possible.
There you go.
A speech is just an appetizer, right?
Yeah.
Like people think, people say, I changed the room because of your speech. No, you didn't.
Yeah.
You occupied somebody's time for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Like and you mentioned earlier, what they do 6 months from now because of your speech, that's the only thing that matters. So, yeah, I mean, realistically, I would say it's probably the blog.
Really?
Because the blog continues to get, Convince and Convert, even though I don't write all the posts there, but I write one a week. Convince and Convert continues to reach, multi-millions of people a year. Mm-hmm. So far more than read a book or see a speech. And there would be no book without the blog.
Yeah.
There was a blog first, and then I started writing books. And without the books, there would be no speeches. So if you think about it from sort of one led to another, it's probably the blog, and the blog still probably has the greatest impact. Even though blogging is, I don't want to say passé, but is less at the tip of the spear than perhaps it used to be from a content perspective. It's probably still the engine for what we're able to do at Convince and Convert.
Well, you brought it up on stage. I've heard you bring it up on stage, and we referenced it earlier. But I think it is time for your mother to get a guest blog opportunity. If she's read your blog,
she'd do it.
Guest blogging is still important. So
yeah, she'd do it. My mom's an English teacher, or was an English teacher.
There you go.
Now. An English teacher for like 30 years. So, fun fact, I don't think I've ever told anybody this publicly. At my previous firm, before I started Convince and Convert, we had a weekly newsletter, which is similar to the weekly newsletter I publish now. and my mom edited. My mom was in charge of
Wow.
editing
Yeah.
email every week for like 6 years, right? So she has had a piece of the universe in the past. So yeah, I'm sure I could get her to write a guest blog.
Well, you know, I'm going to use that as a teaser. Jay reveals a deep, dark secret
Deep
only
dark
on a shark's perspective. So,
so when I published Utility,
uh,
was when we were starting to first do retargeting ads.
Yeah.
Right. And so we ran some retargeting ads for the book launch. And so my mom calls me and says, Jay, super excited about the book launch. Quick question though, why are you buying ads on knitting websites? Is that your core audience?
Right.
And then I had to explain the whole premise of retargeting to her and remarketing. And that was a, kind of a conversation. And she's like, oh, I did not know that's how that worked. I said, because you're right. Knitting audience is not really my core.
True. Well, Jay, it is that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Yes, I am ready.
Okay. Talk Triggers or any of your other books? As far as your favorites.
My personal favorite?
Yes.
Let me answer it this way. I think Talk Triggers is my best work. So far, Utilities had the most impact.
Good.
But Talk Triggers is new, so we'll see.
Yeah. Number 2, delivering a keynote speech or being the MC and event host.
MC. I like it the best. It's my favorite thing. It's because you're working without a net. And most of what I do as an MC is improv and impromptu. And it's a thing that I can do that a lot of people can't do. There's a lot of people who are good speakers. There's a lot of people who are way better than me as speakers. There's not a lot of people who are better than me as an MC. There are some, but not a lot.
All right. So number 3 for a tequila collector.
Yes.
Patron Tequila Añejo or Don Julio?
Also Añejo.
Añejo, yes.
For Reposado, I would say Don Julio. For Añejo, I would say Patron.
Nice. So it was a better answer, more qualified answer than I thought you'd give. You are a certified barbecue judge, I've read.
I am.
Memphis barbecue or Kansas City barbecue?
This is a bit of a loaded question for
Completely. And this could send this podcast off the cliff quickly.
That being the case, and I'm still going to say KC because that's
all right. I'll still promote the book anyway. And the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Okay.
It's the one that's everybody gets stumped on.
I'm not stumped. I just have to think through my answer. Okay. So biscuits are like pizza. Okay. In that, like there's no such thing as bad pizza, right? There's good pizza and there's great pizza. I've never had a bad biscuit. Cornbread is different. I've had plenty of bad cornbread.
True.
Like bad. But what I will say is excellent cornbread is better than excellent biscuits. It's just harder to find. Like I had cornbread the other day that was like unicorn cornbread. It was like unbelievable. I was like, holy cow.
Right.
Please make this all the time. But that is few and far between. So I would say if you had to pick in a restaurant and you didn't know anything about it, you didn't have any word of mouth, I would go biscuit because your chances of disappointment are less. But if you're a gambling man, then go cornbread because you never know. You could hit one out of the park unexpectedly.
Well, this is a question, and you living where you live, you have also been to a Cracker Barrel at some point in your life.
Yeah.
This is a question the waitress will ask you, and it's one that stumps me every time, and I'm the one that asks it because you give a more qualified answer than I do. I just have my jaw hits the floor, just praying she'll bring both. So
if you want to ask about unsweet versus sweet tea, I could go on a little mini rant about that as well.
Well, Jay, where can people find out more about you, follow your blogs, your podcasts, your marketing advice, buy the book, and more?
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. The book is available all the places and ways that books can be procured. Audiobook read by myself and Daniel. Bookstores, Amazon, of course. The website for the book is talktriggers.com. There's tons of free stuff there. There's group discussion guides, research, downloads, videos, like tons of free stuff there. So go to talktriggers.com either way. The book is fully guaranteed as well. So if you don't like it, for whatever reason, Daniel and I will buy you any other book you want. That's true. Any book. You want a first edition Bible, we'll find one somehow, and we'll buy that for you. So no risk in buying the book. So talktriggers.com for that. Our main site is convinceandconvert.com, which now has over 5,000 free articles for marketers and business owners, 500 and something podcasts, and a bunch of other stuff, research, downloads. So you can get yourself educated at convinceandconvert.com.
Why llamas on the cover?
Alpacas, actually.
Alpacas.
And that's one of the things,
Thank you.
One of the things that's actually at talktriggers.com, because people ask so many times, we have an amazing infographic, which is the difference between llamas and alpacas. Yeah, it's pretty great. Okay. And I should also, just a quick plug, my brand new show, the Talk Triggers show, just launched yesterday. So it's a weekly video and a podcast. Just look for Talk Triggers and wherever your podcasts. And each episode is a story. It's only 6 minutes long, so tight. 6-minute story about a business that's killing it with word of mouth. It's really funny. It's super fun. I think people like it. You can find it at thetalktriggershow.com. Anyway, so Daniel and I were writing the book, and the original cover was just like a regular, boring business book, like I've written in the past. It was just like a cover, right? And he and I were talking about it. We're like, man, bro, this is a book about word of mouth. It seems like we should do something that people don't expect, since that's the premise of this book. And I said, okay. So I mocked something up and it sucked. And then I sent it to him, and he just found this picture of two alpacas kind of whispering to one another. And he mocked up the cover and he sent it to me. And I'm like, I love it. I think it's hilarious. But there's no way that Penguin, who publishes our books, there's no way Penguin will approve this. And he's like, they might. I'm like, no, but they're not. And he's like, well, maybe. I said, no. He's like, well, but maybe. I'm like, no. So he's like, well, just send it to him. And I did. And I think somebody was on vacation, which is how this actually happened. And they're like, fine, we love it. We're like, you do? They're like, yeah. I'm like, sure. And like, yeah. So, and then we ended up with a book with alpacas on the cover that's also hot pink. So it all worked out, but it was it did not have the kind of forethought that you might expect.
Well, Jay, I'm honored, and thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective.
My pleasure, Sharks. I appreciate it. Great to see you.
So there was my conversation with Jay Baer, the author of 6 best-selling business books, the founder of 5 multi-million-dollar companies, a frequent MC and keynote, one of fewer than 200 living members of the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame, and he's a subject matter expert at word-of-mouth marketing. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, so how do we get attention in today's world? You've often heard me talk about on my shows the value of context and relevancy. I love when Jay explains attention is the currency. Better said, how do we earn attention? Attention comes from relevancy. He goes on to explain that if you give somebody the content that they want in the format they prefer, and you give it to them at the right time, the time necessary to consume that content magically appears. And he goes on to say, in marketing, we train ourselves to say, how can we be big and reach more people? When really what we should be thinking is, how can we be more relevant to a smaller group of people? Very well said. It shouldn't be too hard to explain why 98% of advertising fails to convert. Second, so I've often stated on this show how powerful and important a brand's core product or service can be, and it's reflected in their marketing. If you look at Apple, for example, then a lot of how they're viewed is based on the quality of their products and services, and a lot of the marketing simply complements that. If you look at a lot of brands with bad reputations, then it's often because they underinvest in their service, especially their customer service departments, and then it's basically lipstick on a pig. As he said, how people make buying decisions has changed fundamentally, and we rely on each other a lot more than the message that the company has concocted. So when you look at reputation management, don't ever underestimate the value of your exchanges with customers that take place in social media, review sites, discussion boards, forums. It can and likely will affect your sales. Just look closely at the brands that spend too much trying to acquire customers and not enough to keep them. Third, as Jay professes, word of mouth is the oldest form of marketing, and it's still the most effective form of marketing. It's the number one way that consumers make decisions about what to buy. He points out amazingly that nobody has a strategy for it, despite the fact that they do have strategies for crisis, social, content, PR, HR, etc. Spend time to develop a word-of-mouth strategy and give your customers a story to tell, a compelling conversation of something that you do differently. As Jay explained, nobody ever says, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience that I just had. So do something extremely well and different and get your customers to tell your story. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this show in order to discuss another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. Now go figure out what is your differentiator and then go find an alpaca or a llama and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.